Hey guys, my name is Tom, and welcome back to the 29th devlog here on my channel. In this one, I gave the launcher the ability to update itself and then tested it with a friend, I fixed some bugs, and I made a big decision about the future of this project. It's a little after 7 o'clock in the evening on Tuesday, and yesterday and today I've made some good progress. I've continued working on the launcher, and I think I now have everything set up so that it can update itself, as well as display a progress bar when downloading and updating game files. I haven't properly tested this yet because it's a bit of a hassle to upload all the files to the necessary places if I'm not reasonably sure it'll work, so we're going to do this on camera. That's not exactly what I was hoping for. Although downloading the game files works, that's nothing new. The text in the bottom bar doesn't display the current status, so I obviously forgot to change something there, but the version number in the bottom right also isn't displaying correctly, and the progress bar seems to instantly complete. I've made a few changes and re-uploaded the necessary files, so let's give this another shot. That was a lot better, and everything except the progress bar seems to be working now, so I'm going to spend some time looking into that. Just after 9 now, and I can't seem to figure out what's going on with this progress bar. I'm using the built-in web client's download file async method, along with the handy download progress changed event. This is supposed to deliver the download progress percentage to me on a silver platter, but for some reason it's 0 the entire time, and then suddenly jumps to 100. I've done a lot of Googling, but I haven't found anything particularly helpful, so I'm just going to blame this on Google Drive. Maybe downloading files from there works a bit differently than the web client expects, so for the time being we'll have to manage without a nice progress bar. I'm hoping that once I have a more permanent and official place to host these files it'll work, and if it doesn't I'll look into this some more then. I still haven't tested the self-updating functionality, which I still want to try out today. Alright, I've changed the launcher version stored in my Google Drive, so it should self-update when I open it now, although I haven't tested this at all yet, so it's quite possible that it'll go horribly wrong. And what do you know, it went horribly wrong. The launcher clearly managed to download the updater, which is a small separate program, but it seems like it was never launched, which is really weird. What's especially strange is that if I try this when debugging, it does actually seem to work. However, it's getting late now and I've been at this pretty much all day, so I'm going to try and figure this out tomorrow. It's currently 4 o'clock, and for the past few hours I've been trying to figure out why my launcher's updater won't start. I've discovered and fixed a few issues, but apparently I haven't found the root of the problem because it's still not working. I managed to get it to start on the first time that it runs, but then after that it seems to break. Even stranger is the fact that this behavior doesn't appear to be consistent. Sometimes it'll work the first time, and other times it doesn't work at all. On top of that, this stuff is extremely difficult to debug as it works differently when I download the files from Drive compared to when I run the program in debug mode through Visual Studio. This means that in order to properly test a change, I need to update all the files that I have stored online and then re-download them, which isn't exactly the most time-efficient process. So I spent pretty much the rest of yesterday trying to figure out what's going on with the launcher. I did find a couple more issues which I managed to fix, but something is still extremely broken. After some extended testing, I've confirmed that the launcher will in fact consistently start the updater the first time, but not after that. Even if I revert the files, the exact same files in identical conditions work the first time, but never in subsequent attempts. I'm not sure if I've ever been this stumped before. None of this makes sense to me, and I have absolutely no clue why it's happening. This kind of behavior is so utterly strange that I'm really not sure where to go from here. I'm entirely out of ideas for what to try, which is super frustrating to say the very least. It's around 7 PM now, and believe it or not, I've actually managed to solve the issue. Through a lot of debugging and Googling, I eventually found out that the launcher was actually starting the updater, except the updater was instantly crashing. From there, it didn't take long to figure out what was causing the crash. The issue was that once the updater started, it would check to see if there's a launcher exe in the directory, and if there is, it would turn it into a backup file. The reason this crashed the updater was because the launcher.exe file was still in use by a process. Now, when I came to that conclusion, I was extremely confused. The first thing I did was to have the updater wait until the launcher process was no longer using the file. However, the updater never actually waited because I had made the assumption that it was the launcher's process which still had a lock on the file. That wasn't the case, which honestly led to even more confusion on my part. No other programs were touching the launcher's directory, much less the executable itself, and the launcher wasn't using it, so why was the file still locked when the updater started? After a bunch more Googling, which basically led me in circles through the Microsoft Docs and various Stack Overflow questions, I remembered something. I've done a lot of reading about files, directories, and processes, and how they interact with each other over the last couple days, and during that time I learned that an application's working directory is inherited by any other process that it starts. Before I say anything else, I want to quickly point out that this is all still pretty new to me, and I'm far from being an expert on any of this, so while I'll do my best to explain things accurately, my understanding of several of the following concepts is incomplete at best. It's very possible that I'll get some things wrong, especially when it comes to specifics. Anyways, for those of you that don't know, the working directory is essentially the location in the file system the program is executing from. The most immediate effect this has that I've encountered is that all relative paths are based on the working directory, not the folder which contains the actual executable. For example, if I open a program from my desktop, its working directory will be on my desktop. However, if that program then starts a different process, it'll inherit the working directory. That means that even though its executable might be stored in my documents folder, all relative paths used in the second process would be relative to my desktop, not my documents directory. This is actually what caused some earlier issues with the launcher and the updater, but I won't go into that. Now back to me remembering that working directories are inherited. When I remembered that, I began to wonder if somehow the lock on the launcher file was also being inherited, so that in some really weird way, the updater was actually the one using the executable, simply because its process had been started by the launcher. A couple more Google searches later, and I found out I was correct. Sort of. This here in particular is where my understanding is a bit iffy, but basically what was actually happening is that the launcher's handle was being inherited by the updater, so that confusingly, the updater was keeping a lock on the launcher file, even though it wasn't actually using it. If that doesn't make any sense, I'm sorry, but I'm not really sure how else to explain it. This whole thing is quite confusing, and although I'm sort of able to make sense of it in my head, putting it into words is a whole other challenge. Anyways, I've been rambling about this for quite a while, and by now you're probably wondering how I actually managed to fix the problem. Given how long it took me to explain the issue, it would be reasonable to expect that the solution would be quite complex, however, it literally turned out to be a one-line fix. All I did was set one of the process's start info values, namely the use shell execute field. This value is set to false by default in .NET Core, and as I understand it, setting it to true basically causes the process to start the same way as it would if a user had opened it from the start menu, meaning the handle isn't inherited. Unfortunately, it isn't currently possible to directly disable handle inheritance when starting a new process programmatically, but this seems to get the job done, which I'm quite happy about. Before I show you the launcher updating itself, I'd like to get some feedback. I don't usually go into this much depth when I talk about problems I run into and how I manage to solve them, but I'm curious. Was that explanation interesting? Was it too confusing or too technical to be relevant? I feel like in these videos I'll often mention an issue I have, and then the next time I update you guys I'll have fixed it. I think that might make it look like I have a really easy time solving my problems, but that isn't the case at all. Even if that explanation didn't make much sense, was it at least relatable or maybe even encouraging to see that in reality I also struggle with errors I encounter? I'd love to know if you guys found this helpful and if I should go as in depth in future devlogs. I read and respond to all the comments, so if you say something down there, you can rest assured that I'll see it. Anyways, when I download the launcher installer, which also acts as the updater, and run it, you'll see that it creates a folder, downloads the launcher, and then starts it. The launcher then moves the installer into the same folder and installs the game, although this is nothing new. If I update the launcher version that's stored online and then run the launcher again, you'll see that it does in fact start the updater and the new version gets downloaded. What's kind of cool is that the launcher and the updater are set up so that the folder that contains them can be moved pretty much anywhere and they'll continue to work perfectly fine. However, the shortcut that's created when the launcher is installed doesn't update, so moving the folder breaks the shortcut. I don't think there's a way to make shortcuts update as a file moves around, simply because it would have no way of knowing where the file moved to, which unfortunately means that I may need to rethink this whole mobile folder setup. Being able to move the folder around at will is nice, but forcing users to manually create their own shortcuts might be a bit too inconvenient. It's been a couple days without an update now, and I've made some solid progress. I ended up reworking how the updater works yet again, so it now acts purely as an updater like it did before. I used Visual Studio to create a Microsoft installer file which can install my launcher and updater, so now the whole process feels a lot more professional and less hacky, although I must say that some of the installer's UI is absolutely disgusting. I'll definitely have to look into some alternatives in the future, but it'll be fine for now. I also did a test run with one of my friends, which was super helpful. The launcher works quite nicely and the update process goes smoothly, although we did run into some issues with the game itself. One super critical bug, which I've actually already fixed, had to do with the way I was synchronizing ticks. I was using the local system time converted to UTC to calculate how long it had taken a packet from the server to reach the client, and then using that to sync up the tick value. This relied on a fatal assumption, that system times when converted to UTC would match. Different computers do have the same time, and any regular user would probably never notice, but it's not guaranteed that they'll be perfectly in sync. It took a while to track this issue down because the only symptom was that he couldn't move around. His connection was working and TCP was fine, but it seemed like none of his UDP packets were arriving. Meanwhile, my connection was running completely normally. After initially thinking it was an issue on his end and maybe something along the line was blocking his UDP packets, we figured out that information was in fact going through. For context, it's important to know that my lag compensation system discards inputs from players if they appear to be in the future. A bit of server-side debugging later, I discovered that according to my lag compensation system, my friend's client was running several hundred milliseconds ahead of the server. At that point I asked him what time his computer said it was, and when we compared, we found out that his computer was running a couple seconds ahead of mine. Anyways, I've switched to a more traditional ping system to synchronize the server and client ticks, and it seems to be working quite nicely. I was hoping to get some multiplayer footage, as these devlogs usually just consist of me sailing around on my own, but unfortunately we ran into some other issues which didn't really make that possible. I do have a small list of bugs to take care of now, but I'm super excited that I've got the launcher set up because it makes testing with friends so much less tedious. Additionally, I want to take a quick moment to mention the Discord server as we hit 1,000 members today. That's pretty insane, so thank you to everyone who's checked it out and stuck around, and if you haven't joined it yet, I'm honestly not sure what you're waiting for. It's a great community of developers and we'd love to have you. It's Wednesday morning now, and I've made a pretty big decision about the future of this project. I'm going to move the server files into Unity. If you weren't aware, up until now, my server has been a regular console app, and I've been using Beppu Physics to simulate the physics. This is a pretty big decision, and it's nothing against Beppu. I still think it's a great physics library, it's just that having two different physics engines on the client and the server makes things difficult. Most notably, client prediction is harder to implement and much less reliable with two physics engines, as there's no guarantee that they'll calculate the same results given the same inputs. In fact, I'd be quite surprised if they did, and it's not that one is right and the other is wrong, they just simulate things differently, which can lead to different results. Unity's physics isn't deterministic either though, so you can still get different simulations, but it'll be a lot closer than using two completely separate physics systems. Additionally, I'll get access to all of the handy Unity methods and tools, which means less overall work for me. And that's another driving factor behind this decision. Unity is extremely well documented, and there's tons of resources about nearly every problem you could ever run into, which is simply not the case for Beppu. Even after using it for nearly a year, I still find myself digging through Beppu Physics' demos and asking a lot of questions on the forums, and although the developer is super good about responding quickly, it does take a lot of time. So in short, I think moving the server into Unity will not only make implementing client prediction a lot easier, but it'll also increase my overall productivity, which means more progress and more interesting devlogs. It's pretty late at night now, and I've finished moving all the server code into a Unity project. Obviously, since I had built everything around Beppu Physics and around my own component system, moving the code produced a lot of errors. I've managed to resolve all of them, although I got rid of most of them by just commenting out code. Also, as a quick side note, earlier today I was accepted into the YouTube Partner Program, which means I now have access to some more cool YouTube features, including monetizing my videos, so that's super exciting. Anyways, over the next couple days, I'll be going through the server project and rebuilding all the mechanics so they work with Unity, although it should be a lot quicker than the first time. However, that's a bunch of stuff that I've already talked about in devlogs, and this video is quite long as it is, so I think I'm actually going to leave it here for this one. Hopefully I'll have the server working again by next week, and maybe we can finally jump into client prediction then. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to smash the like button, and leave me a comment down below if you feel like helping out my channel. Also, if you'd like to join me as I continue on this journey of building a multiplayer game, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're always notified when I upload another video. With that said, thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again next time.